Well, as we go through like the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have the overlying, story and theme of it. I just wanted to kind of go through it just for those that have not read it, and I guess just a layman's version. And if there's anything in there that stands out to you that you think would blow our minds, I would love for you to share it with us. But like when it starts off, he's uh, he's the king of Uruk, and it talks about it was a great wild city, and it was even quoted that he was the one who knew all things, and he was terrifying like a wild bull. And they even said that the seven sages, the Apkallu, laid the foundations of Uruk. And like we were talking about the connections, that draws parallels with the Watchers and stuff of the Bible. But he hears about this wild beast of a man called Enkidu from a trapper, and then he sends out a harlot from the temple of Anana to beguile him. Was there anything with that you found interesting or stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, that word beguile is to try and take his power
That's
away.
what happened,
right? This is very similar, but in a different way. That happens with Samson and Delilah. And if we understand that the fallen angels have a counterfeit legal system, a counterfeit control over the world, and they like to counterfeit everything that God does, just as Satan wanted to raise his throne in heaven to be like God. They're going to continue to counterfeit all the way through our ancient history today, and into the end time. They're going to try and counterfeit everything to increase their stature and their mythos and to lead people away from God. So you have this king that is a priest king in their tradition. So Gilgamesh, again, is very much like depictions of the Merovingians, like a fisher priest king, right? As part of that whole polytheist ideology. And that they had extra powers, including healing. Not only could they heal themselves, but they could heal other people. And the Merovingians were thought to have that same type of thing. Rephaim were thought to have that same ability in the
even
Ugaritic
their name
text.
means healer.
In fact, yeah, and so it clearly talks about it in the Ugaritic text that not only could they heal themselves, but they could heal others. Now, whether it was that something as part of their DNA inheritance, or was that technology, we don't know. Because a lot of people believe sarcophagi and sarcophagus for individuals would use those as technology to heal themselves. It's also thought that's why you had to take the head of a giant, so that they couldn't heal themselves either through technology or through self-healing, that it was so sudden and quick. That's the only way that you would kill them. Just as David took Goliath's head, and we get other accounts in the Bible as well. And so you have this imagery that is very much like the Nazarite as a priest king, only this is a judge, and this is before the monarchy, because of the way of God world with Israel was not to have the monarchy, but he knew that they would demand it at some point in time. So I think they counterfeit everything. So I think the demigods were given through their genetics extraordinary gifts, but there was ways to control it. And so I don't know whether that had anything to do with through beguiling, was through enchantments or cutting of hair, but we do know Gilgamesh had a lot of hair, just as Samson had a lot of hair. So, but the Nazarite is not power that is sort of transmitted physically through DNA. That was provided by God and symbolized through the hair. and that he was never to cut it as part of the faith of the Nazarite. And of course, that's what Delilah did. So I think there's some analogies there. But again, I look at that as a polytheist version, a counterfeit version of
Yeah.
what God does. They always try and replicate it. They just can't do it the same way.
I mean, that's where it all stemmed from. And if it's worth imitating, they're going to imitate it and try to pervert it to their own. But I thought it was wild because the cunning, it showed the cunningness, of Gilgamesh. He knew this
Yep.
was a wild beast of the field, and he wanted to be the mighty one. He
Yep.
wanted to be the conqueror of everyone. He wanted everybody to know that he was the great warrior of the world, and this was the
Yep.
only person in his mind that could rival him. So he knew if he sent this woman to lay with him for 6 days and 7 nights, and then pull away from him, that all the animals in the wilderness would reject him because they knew that he had been tainted. And in return, she brings him back into civilization, and he's even like a hero. It describes that he was praised, and that he was. I think they even said that he was the watchman of Eridu, that he would protect the flocks and stuff. So the local people loved him.
Yep. Yeah. So what's interesting about the Gilgamesh story is that it underlines, and again, why we have to be careful of the wording in the writings, is the Anunnaki were watchers. And they created demigods in the same way the Nephilim were created, and they were also called watchers. And they were also called Anunnaki. But so it makes sense then that a demigod giant like Gilgamesh would be called the Watcher of Uruk, right? Because that's and the Watchers are around the throne room as well, and so again, it all sort of makes sense. He's also called the hero, just as the giants in Greek mythology or history were called heroes, and heroes were the offspring of the gods and a
Mm-hmm.
human female. Um, and so you do get the gods in Sumerian history also called heroes. So you can have heroes of heaven in Sumerian tradition and also heroes of the earth. But you'll quickly sort of understand the difference. So one of the gods that's involved with um, giants after the flood and with the creation of giants after the flood in Sumeria is a god called Nergal. And he's a great hero, a great warrior of the gods, and he's got a lion face. And this is one of the gods that the Avim, Rephaim giants of the east, as opposed to the ones in the covenant land, same tribe or nation of giants, and one presumes they worship the same gods, but we don't have a record of that biblically. They worship Nergal
Was
in
he
the
the god of
east.
the underworld, or is that just a
Uh,
name that sounds similar? Okay.
yes, yeah, god of the underworld. Yeah,
Yeah, because they wanted to get those spirits of their fathers and ancestors that was locked up in the abyss, you think? Yeah.
yep, yep,
Well, him and Gilgamesh, they end up meeting, and of course, they have a big epic wrestling match, and it records that Gilgamesh gets the better of him, and then they become best of friends. Isn't that the story of most men?
yep,
Some of my best friends I
yep.
got in fights with in school. We're funny creatures, aren't we?
Yep, we are. So, yeah, and that's going to start a partnership in this story. And again, he is an example of a second incursion giant as well. And I think that when you get the descriptions of Enkidu, he has the same kind of description as
hmm
Gilgamesh does.
They
So
said he was shorter,
what's
right?
odd though,
Yeah.
yeah, a little bit shorter but hairier. Now, what's odd is that he was created to keep Gilgamesh in check, and one would think he would be created maybe bigger to do that, and maybe with more powers. But they seem to be pretty equal. So that's kind of odd. I'm not sure what they were trying to communicate in that aspect
Which I
of
seen
the
it like
story.
maybe he was until the harlot came and took and civilized him. It kind of like knocked him down
Yep,
a notch.
maybe that's the case. Yeah,
But where I seen the parallels here was after they become friends and form this alliance. It says that Gilgamesh wants to make a great name for himself and build these temples and towers like the Tower of Babel. And the location of Uruk, it's basically a marsh, so they don't have the cedars of Lebanon and all these things. So then
yeah,
they
yeah.
devised this plan to go to the cedar mountain where this great beast called Humbaba guarded this cedar mountain or cedar forest, and they made plans to kill him and take the cedar to build all their temples.
Yeah. So to put this into perspective, and this is where you get a Ugaritic connection, is that Mount Herman was called Mount Saphon in the Ugaritic text. And even in the Bible, we get several names for Mount Hermons, like Sirion and Sion, and there's one other one that's eluding me, but it was a very famous mountain. And that's where they went, was to Mount Herman and to the cedar forests of Mount Hermon. So when you see in the book of Amos where it's talking about the Amorites were like the cedars of Mount Hermon and the oaks, you can start to see that connection, especially when you understand that the oath of Hiram anathema to create the giants and to carry that out to the end came about on Mount Hermon, and that Mount Hermon is rooted in the same Hebrew series of words and is an extension out of it as Haram and Harem, which is accursed and making oaths and stuff like that. And it's spelled Charam and Cherem, and as we translated that in English, and that is the same CH that begins with Herman, only we've got a transliterated with an O, then you've got a YM on the end. And so this is the mountain of the cursed oath that was declared to carry it out through the end. And it was probably the most holy site of polytheism in the world. And that's why it's overlapping cultures. And that's why you had so many temples that were provided for or worship there, from the Pan Temple to the Romans did temples there. It's also the location of the gateway to
Mm-hmm.
Hades, and it's also the place Jesus went to announce that he was going to build his church.
That's where he
And
transcended.
there's nothing, yeah, there was nothing that they could do about that. And this King Humbada, he is not an ordinary giant. He's the king of the cedar forest. And there's different spellings of it. You might see it as Hababa as well. There's 3 or 4 different spellings I've seen on it in different translations and sources. But he was a giant called the Terrible One.
So you don't take this literal where it says that he was a beast, with fangs and all this stuff. You take it as he was a king.
Oh, he was a king, but he was a chimeric king.
Uh,
He might be created in something. And again, is that from before the flood, or is that again done with the technology after the flood? But he was created to do terrible things to humankind. But then the Rephaim are terrible ones as a group. They were doing horrible things to humankind. This is just sort of the ultimate one. And biblically, we get terrible ones, particularly in Ezekiel 32, where it talks about the
mhm.
terrible ones. And you're going to like
Oh
this as
yeah,
well,
you're
I think.
stretching me. I love it.
So, yeah. So that's in this dual prophecy of Ezekiel 32, you have Pharaoh that is being spoken to by these terrible ones who are locked away in the sides
Hmm.
of the abyss. And he's also being talked through the mighty ones, El, or fallen angels that are in the abyss. And this is obviously in the time of Nebuchadnezzar and the time of Ezekiel. And these terrible ones are called terrible ones because they did horrible things to humans on Earth and were killed, and then they went to the sides of the abyss. So this is going to be Nephilim and Rephaim, both before and after the flood. Well, and we get terrible ones like in Isaiah 25 too, which is, if you read those first half dozen verses there, it'll blow your mind away. And I cover it off in the new book, Isaiah 14. This terrible ones is something that is, and the terrible of nations is a common term in that era of prophecy. And so if you take that back to Hebrew, terrible ones, it goes back in the singular form as arit. And if you look at, let's say, Nephilim or Seraphim or Rephaim, the I am is the male plural and understood as ones. So Rephaim would be giant ones. Nephilim would be giant ones. Gibborim, I
Mighty
am, are the
ones.
mighty ones, as we get it translated. The seraphim angels are the serpent-faced ones.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so you would finish that off as Eratim, as the terrible ones, as they translate it in plural. So that would be the plural format. Now, you have a King Og who was of the Rephaim, of the city of Ugarit. You take Og's name back to Hebrew, and it's going to be translated into English as OWG for Og. But it's rooted in UWG for Ug, which means round and wide and stout. So it's, again, that 2-to-1 height to width ratio. And he also had a long neck. It also means his name, and just like the Anakim had longer necks, serpentine sort of look, especially with the elongated skulls and other aspects to them. So when you look at what Ug and Arit, you form the city of Ugarit, of the Ugaritic text. This was the city of King Og before the giant war of Genesis 14, when the Rephaim are going to be, as a tribe, almost wiped out. And then as the last of the Rephaim, he's going to move over to Mount Herman to rule over the hybrid Amorites and other giants in his 60 cities, his 12 pentapoles military complex. And you quickly understand that King Og, the last of the Rephaim, was one of these terrible ones. Ug, the terrible one. And if you did that like the city of Anak, Kiriath Arba, which we understand as Hebron, that means city, Kiriath Arba, the city of four, as you take Arba back to Hebrew in its meaning. So it would be Kiriath Ugaritim, the city of the terrible ones, or the city of Og of the terrible ones. And of course, you have the council of the Datanu that are formed there, which is the tribes of the different giant nations as they worship the Baalim and take their orders. And they're all royal dynasties. So that royal dynasty in the Ugaritic text actually overlaps into Mesopotamia, with one of the representatives of the Baalim ruling over Mesopotamia. And again, starts to match up with Deuteronomy 32 and Psalms
And I like
82.
how you're connecting these dots too, because what you're saying ties right in with this, because I put this in my notes. Anything I read, I'm a nerd like this. I take notes on it. And I thought this was important, so I put it in bold and then underlined it when I was typing it out. But when it was describing this Humbaba, it says, the two friends killed the guardian of the forest. And in quotations, it says, whose voice made Herman and Lebanon tremble.
Yeah.
So a lot of people want to say that,
Because he's from
this
Mount Herman.
mountain was, like Ararat or somewhere farther north. But so if that, if that is your line of thinking, then why would you throw in Herman and Lebanon, which is way further south?
You wouldn't. Yeah. The Cedars of Lebanon built all the great temples and palaces along with the rocks. Yeah. So, and he was assigned there. So he was created maybe elsewhere, but he was assigned to rule there over the cedar forest. And here's how he's described, just so that people understand when I'm talking Chimera. This is in the tradition of the antediluvian, which again suggests some sort of angelic technology to create this, or something that was passed on to the giants early on after the flood. So he is a giant monster, and monster is a key word here, with the face and the paws of a lion. He has had the claws of a vulture or an eagle. He had the horns of a bull, covered in scales, and the tail and the phallus that has snake's head at the end of each. This was not a normal creature. This was completely different than Gilgamesh and Enkidu, or
And
Utnapishtim.
that explains why they were so afraid
And he
too,
was on,
because Enkidu and Gilgamesh were
yeah,
fearless warriors, and several times, luckily it didn't happen at the same time. First, Enkidu got scared. Gilgamesh encouraged him to keep going, and then it just flipped back and forth between the two. But they were terrified.
they were. And he was thought he was not able to be defeated. He was that strong, that powerful, and had the
Mm.
protection of the gods. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu, they go there in violation of the rules set out, that he was under their protection, doing their bidding to do horrible things to humankind.
But they won over Samash, wasn't it? The sun god agreed to help them.
Yep,
Now the seven
yep,
splendors. Now that I'm telling you, that threw me for a loop, and I have contemplated on that for quite some time. And of course, the seven sacred sciences kind of come up just because of that number correlation in my head. But it talks about that he had,
yep,
this Humbaba had seven splendors of protection, and that when they snuck up on him, he was not ready, and he only had one of his splendors. So the two said, "Hurry, let's strike before he puts on his other splendors." What's your interpretation of the
yeah,
splendors?
yeah. That's very, very interesting for sure. Typically, seven is the number of the pantheon. Just as you've got that constant number of seven in all different cultures, just as you have the seven archangels in the Bible. And so I think he was under the protection of that high seven gods, and that. But what didn't obviously they weren't all there at that time, or for some reason they had stopped protecting him. I mean, there's some context here that isn't provided to us. But splendor is like this brilliant sort of
Mm.
light. Again, that sort of would invoke a spirit or a god in a spirit form versus creating a physical form
Mm.
for themselves. So I tend to think it's more that as opposed to the seven sacred sciences, which again would come from seven
Mm.
of them, right? Uh, and representative of the gods, but there's obviously something lost in translation and in meaning that we're missing there, because the seven can take you into a number of different directions.
And I have a tendency to look at things too deep, and I'm sure that was one of them there. But after
Yeah,
they defeat this beast, they return back to Uruk, the mighty victors, and there's a big parade and party for them. And it says that the goddess Anana throws herself at Gilgamesh and basically proposes to him, wants him to be her husband, and he
yeah,
turns her down essentially,
yeah,
and releases. She goes back to her father Enlil, and outraged at her embarrassment, requests that the bull of heaven be released. Uh,
yeah.
what do you know about this bull of heaven? I know you got something to blow me away with here.
Yeah, so you've got a few things that are going on there. So Inanna is the queen of heaven. She's very important as part of the ruling seven. And again, it's a constant in polytheism. And Enlil is a post-Diluvian god, son of Anu, and takes over after Anu and the whole Tiamat and other parent gods disappear. So from that sort of perspective, we also may want to look at the idea that Gilgamesh is a different kind of giant than the Rephaim that
Mm-hmm.
we described, with his dark hair and his different size. If we look at the analogy that Seraphim were the main watchers who created giants, and that's why you have most of the gods as serpentine. And their offspring early on, both before and after the flood, looked just like them.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that episode, I encourage you to head on over to PrometheusLensPodcast.com and sign up for our All Access Pass. It's $10 a month, comes out to 33 cents a day. It gets you 48-hour early access to all episodes, members only episodes, access to the private community, and that comes with monthly Q&As and member chats. So we talk with authors and other great speakers, and you guys get to ask them your questions every single month. We also offer a smaller tier package that is just $4 a month, and with that gets you access to the 48-hour early access, the monthly chats, and the Q&As. The only thing that does not get you is the members only episodes like the one you just saw. But if you enjoyed that, head on over, sign up. It's quick, it's easy, and get access to not only this episode that you just saw, but many other great exclusive content. Torches high.